Most Americans have heard the history of the American Revolution again and again, but no matter how much you think you know, there are plenty of things about the war that gave rise to our nation that don't make sense. Though teasing out the causes of the American Revolution is seriously complicated, one in particular stands out: representation.
Taxation without representation.
Exactly. It also doesn't just pop up out of nowhere right before the war. You see, in 1764, Massachusetts, colonist James Otis published the Rights of the British Colonies Asserted and Proved, in which he argued that giving the colonists a seat in government wouldn't weaken Britain, writing, "This would firmly unite all parts of the British Empire in the greatest peace and prosperity, and render it invulnerable and perpetual."
Even as we shoot down British soldiers, we will be winning rights their children shall enjoy forever.
Even if Britain didn't 100% agree, why didn't they change course when the rebellion turned into full-out war? Well, actually, they did. In 1778, Britain sent a group of representatives known as the Carlisle Commission to the colonies with a proposal: stop the war, and you can rule yourselves. But the members of the Continental Congress could feel the momentum of the revolution, not to mention that they were wary of allegations of corruption and collaboration with the commission. In other words, the enemy. They nixed the proposal, although a fun little what if is, would it have been so roundly rejected had all the representatives been there for the vote? Well, it's easy to understand why farmers and other working class folks might want freedom from the British Crown. A surprising number of elite upper class colonists were firmly in the Revolution camp as well. Take Virginia, for example. The higher ranking members of Virginia society got to North America by virtue of the colonial system. Not only that, they continued to enjoy plenty of big and little luxuries imported from Britain. So why would they choose to support a scrappy breakaway republic?
This is a time for choosing sides.
Turns out they did it for the most American of reasons. They couldn't get high-end goods. You see, as time went on, trade was hampered by British taxes, as were fancy foreign imports. Wealthy planters began to worry that their financial situation was being undercut by money-hungry Britain. Some were concerned that the growing discontent might shatter the social order, giving enslaved people the idea that they deserved equal rights. With that in mind, the revolution became a way for elites to maintain the financial and social order that elevated them without interference from Britain. And they were right. While slavery was outlawed across the British Empire in the 1830s, it took a bloody civil war and a constitutional amendment to outlaw U.S. slavery, which didn't happen until 1865. You don't have to do a deep dive into early American history to realize the colonists were never going to win a war against the all-powerful British by themselves. Luckily, France came along with a major assist. But while it's clear that France and a few other nations lent serious help to the budding republic, it's not so obvious why. At the time, France was a pre-revolution monarchy that supported both the aristocracy and Catholicism. Why would they train, supply, and fund a bunch of ragtag rebels facing off against the growing British Empire? For one thing, the ragtag bit is more of a myth than strict reality. Moreover, the cultural differences between the American colonists and the French may not have been quite as stark as it sounds. Sure, King Louis XVI was still in power, but the Enlightenment had come to France in full force, bringing with it new ideas about society and government that were explicitly echoed in what Thomas Jefferson and company wrote in the Declaration of Independence. There were political factors to consider also. France and Britain had long been rivals, so helping the rebels meant striking a blow against an old enemy. Not to mention making friends with a new nation that produced all sorts of profitable crops and goods. That's likely the major reason why nations like Spain and the Netherlands joined France in supporting the not-so-ragtag revolutionists. Might as well profit and keep the Brits down. There were plenty of times during the American Revolution when George Washington barely escaped serious injury or death. He was the subject of a 1776 assassination plot, barely avoided being captured by the British in New York, and led its December 1776 surprise attack that could have proven disastrous, although it turned out to be the rebels' first real win of the war. Washington's closest brush with disaster came at the September 11, 1777 Battle of Brandywine.
At Brandywine, Pennsylvania, the Americans fought the largest engagement of the war so far, and Washington suffered one of his worst losses.
British Lieutenant General Sir William Howe forced Washington's army into a battle at Brandywine Creek near Philadelphia. It was a loss for the Continentals, but not a crushing defeat, since many colonial soldiers managed to retreat safely. But Washington himself had an alarmingly close call. For a few moments at least, an enemy sharpshooter had him in his sights. His name was Captain Patrick Ferguson, widely touted as the best marksman in the British Army. Crouched along the creek, Ferguson saw a group of rebel officers pass nearby. He ordered the soldiers under his command to shoot, but canceled the order at the last second. According to the Philadelphia campaign by Thomas J. Maguire, Ferguson felt it was not pleasant to fire at the back of an unoffending individual who was acquitting himself very coolly of his duty. Pride in his craft kept Ferguson from taking out George Washington. It might be the biggest what if that would have completely changed America as we know it today. Charles Lee was a British officer who joined the colonists in 1775. He was commissioned as a major general in the Continental Army and at first enjoyed the acclaim of his fellow commanders, eventually becoming the Army's second-in-command. But Lee came into such frequent and dramatic conflict with Washington that his once stellar reputation began to tarnish. He's now considered one of the worst generals of the American Revolution. At the June 28, 1778 Battle of Monmouth, Washington criticized Lee for his messy, confusing command.
Lee's lack of confidence in his own men saw them abandon the fight within the first hour of battle.
Lee's response was so spicy that he was charged with insubordination and temporarily removed. Clearly not knowing when he ought to mind his manners, Lee became such a constant problem that he was accused of treason and permanently dismissed in 1780.
Removing Lee cemented Washington's unquestioned role as commander-in-chief for the remainder of the war.
While Lee's rash decisions are plenty confusing, an earlier incident in his career makes things even weirder. In 1776, after the British took New York City, Lee was captured and held a prisoner of war for 2 years. During that time, he wrote to Sir William Howe with inside advice on how to defeat the rebels, although those letters didn't become public until after Lee's 1782 death. There are accusations that he even came up with a concrete plan to hand the colonies back to Britain. Others wonder if he may have been a canny double agent or simply a difficult man who perhaps wrestled with untreated mental health issues. So who was the real Charles Lee?
It's a mystery! It's a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma!
In a war full of dramatic episodes, few are more gut-wrenching than the story of British Major John André. He's perhaps most notorious for basically being Benedict Arnold's connection, facilitating his betrayal and an attempted takeover of the fort at West Point, New York.
In exchange for £20,000, I shall transfer to you the plans for West Point.
The plot failed, and André was captured and executed in October 1780. Though André's execution was ordered by George Washington, the reasons aren't clear. Washington was said to have admired André and may even have seen him as a poor sap caught between two opposing sides. He even offered to return André to the British in exchange for Arnold, but was turned down. Something about the whole thing didn't make sense. The day before his death, André reached out to Washington for mercy, writing, "If aught in my character impresses you with esteem towards me, if aught in my misfortunes marks me as a victim of policy and not of resentment, I shall experience the operation of these feelings in your breast by being informed that I am not to die on a gibbet." Other officers thought André should at least be given the dignity of death by firing squad and not the hanging accorded to common criminals. Yet Washington and other Continental Army commanders voted to have him hanged anyway. Major General Nathaniel Greene argued that it was a fitting death for a spy. Washington never explained his decision. The rebels got a big assist from a group known as the Culper Spy Ring. They were based in Setauket, Long Island, and organized by a cavalry officer named Benjamin Talmadge.
What are you doing here?
I saw Ben Talmadge trying to recruit me for a secret mission.
Many of those involved have since been revealed, including farmer Abraham Woodhull and sailor Caleb Brewster. But one member of the ring remains unknown to this day, Agent 355. Talmadge used numbers and code names known as the Culper Code to conceal identities.
355 in the Culper Code meant lady.
Agent 355 is mentioned just once by Woodhull, according to Morton Pennypacker's General Washington's spies, who quotes, "I think by the assistance of a 355 of my acquaintance, we shall be able to outwit them all." But a close reading, the assistance of a 355, reveals that Talmadge may not be speaking about a full-on spy, but using a generic term, not an actual code name.
This is war. You never know who's listening.
Still, people love to speculate about the mysterious woman's identity. Some folks point to Anna Strong, a Long Island resident who was Woodhull's neighbor and whose husband supported the rebellion. She allegedly communicated with agents, reportedly hanging a black petticoat on a washing line if a message was ready for pickup. Other candidates included a unnamed lover of Agent 723, Robert Townsend, and none other than Benedict Arnold's sweetheart, Peggy Shippen. The opening lines of the Declaration of Independence read, "All men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness."
Not only a declaration of our independence, but of the rights of all men.
But dig a little deeper, and that notion is complicated by some of the founding fathers. In a 1776 letter to James Sullivan, John Adams contemplated the idea of letting non-elites vote. Adams thought the notion dangerous, or at least a major political headache, writing, "There will be no end of it. Women will demand a vote. Lads from 12 to 21 will think their rights not enough attended to. And every man who is not a farthing will demand an equal voice with any other in all acts of state." Adams, the second U.S. president, was part of the land-owning elite guaranteed voting rights under the colonial system. He had an estimated net worth of $21.5 million in modern US dollars and owned a 40-acre estate. But skepticism about democracy wasn't an Adams-only problem. Other founding fathers were wary of populism and initially ensured that only members of the House of Representatives were elected by popular vote. In fact, senators weren't elected by popular vote until 1913, with the ratification of the 17th Amendment to the Constitution.